On 12 September 2025, the Baltic sky erupted in flames as more than 70 Ukrainian unmanned aircraft from low-cost AQ-400s to UJ-26 Boober ERs and Banshee-7 electronic warfare drones pierced through dense S-400 air defenses and struck the Primorsk oil terminal directly. A chain of explosions turned the strategic fueling hub into a sea of fire, forcing Russia to face a fatal breach in its defense system. The attack not only crippled energy infrastructure but also raised a major question: does a superpower still have what it takes to counter these bold new tactics? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any more videos. At midday on 12 September 2025, at the Old Morsk oil port in Baltimore, a quiet but tense scene unfolded. Two large crews, seemingly mysterious and patient, stood ready to load millions of oil bottles. However, that calm was quickly broken when an unusual detail appeared on the screen of the long-range VHF station Nepalese M, located hundreds of kilometers to the south. More than 70 unauthorized signals simultaneously crowded into the low-frequency band, heading toward the Russian Air Force. According to military observers, the source of this series of signals stretched for over 1,000 kilometers, carrying the potential to deploy up to 3 tons of high-explosive bombs, enough to create strategic pressure from the outset. At the Obrus Air Command Center in London, the warning system immediately activated, alarms blaring as data showed the Big Bird 91N6E surveillance unit had validated the event. Analysts assessed that the foundation for the entire operation had been meticulously prepared months in advance, beginning in Gill's planning office. The real obstacle for Ukraine was not only the distance of over 1,000 kilometers, but also the need to penetrate Russia's dense air defense system, which NATO commonly refers to as an anti-access area denial (A2AD) bubble. Against that backdrop, Russian generals maintained a calm posture, in line with the multi-layered defense plan they had established. The 3-layered air defense system operated in sync, from S-400 complexes with 92 N6E missiles locking targets around St. Petersburg, to Pantsir S-1 radars at low altitudes ready to fire 30mm cannons capable of spitting out up to 5,000 rounds per minute. However, what unfolded was not a single or random strike. Intelligence data showed this was a carefully designed feint campaign, geographically precise. The waves of signals and decoy targets had artfully drawn Russian attention toward the Primorsk area, stretching across the villages of Sevrosko, Tosnopokrovsko, Uzmino, and even the city of Romanasov. In St. Petersburg, a series of points such as Velezovsky, Tosnansky, Grichinsky, Romanasovsky, and Pushkinsky successively became assumed targets, forcing the Russian air defense system to concentrate fire and attention. According to a report from a young officer in charge of the most powerful S-400 battery stationed at Grichinsky, all the targets vanished from the command screen the moment he sent his routine report to headquarters. The strategic mistake began there. What Russia thought was a victory was actually a trap. As a result, more than 70 Ukrainian aircraft were able to penetrate deeply into the Romanasovsky area, including 35 AQ-400S combat aircraft, with 40 other aircraft forming the main spearhead. At the core of this formation were 15 UJ-26 Boober ERs, specially selected for the mission to breach the dense defenses at Primorsk. Observers note that the UJ-26 Boober ER is Ukraine's only long-range aircraft capable of a 1,000-kilometer flight, while carrying a weapons payload of up to 40 kilograms, thanks to fuel-efficient engines and precision control software. Accompanying them were Banshee-7s, electronic warfare aircraft developed on the same Boober airframe but equipped with jamming software and signal simulation payloads instead of real munitions. Their mission was to clear the way, neutralize enemy radar, and guide the main attack elements to the target. Meanwhile, the AQ-400 was chosen for its simplicity and mass producibility. With a glass fuselage design that reduces radar reflection, this type can be manufactured quickly and cheaply, meeting the demand for hundreds of units in a high-intensity campaign. That early morning, more than 70 aircraft took off from multiple dispersed points across Ukrainian territory. Flying at low altitude, they followed rivers and dense forests, using preloaded digital terrain maps and maintaining absolute radio silence. This was a severe test for the autopilot systems. Some aircraft did not pass the test, either crashing due to technical failures or losing contact while flying near the ground. But these losses had been accounted for in the overall plan. When the formation crossed the Russian coastline, the rules of the game changed. The aircraft could no longer hide and began to face the layers of air defenses directly. The Big Bird 91N6E radar detected the series of targets, immediately designating 35 signals as the greatest threat, forcing the S-400 system to fire. A volley of 48 N6 missiles rose from the launchers, downing the low-cost AQ-400 targets. For Russia, it was a proud defense, full of military romance. But for Ukraine, it was a feint designed to stretch Russian defenses away from the key attack axes. Meanwhile, 40 other aircraft dispersed across the Leningrad Oblast countryside, forcing Pantsir and Buk batteries to keep moving, falling into a cat-and-mouse engagement that lasted for hours. Meanwhile, the remaining 40 aircraft dispersed across the Leningrad Oblast countryside, opening direct confrontations with Russia's low-altitude air defense systems. Near Versovsky, a Pantsir S-1 battery set to low alert mode began tracking a target. The Pantsir 1 RS-21E radar swept continuously, receiving a clear signature of a UJ-26 Bojur. Russian operators watched every electronic readout on the missile control screen, believing they had the situation under control. But the events unfolded differently. On the Ukrainian side, an electronic warfare operator was simultaneously monitoring that same Pantsir radar signal, shielded by a nearby Banshee 7 escort. Seconds later, the Banshee 7 emitted a powerful burst exactly on the Pantsir's X-band frequency, turning the Russian control screens completely white. Target locks were totally broken. In that tense moment, the Russian operator only had time to hastily fire the two 30mm 2A38M guns, but the rounds could not slow the Bobur. It passed through the curtain of air defenses and vanished into the night, leaving stunned silence in the command bunker. Such cat-and-mouse exchanges of tactics and fire repeated through the night. Russian forces fought tenaciously and delivered heavy fire, shooting down a total of 33 aircraft. Over St. Petersburg, numerous rounds were fired, leaving long smoke trails across the sky. But military analysts say those losses had been calculated in advance. Ukraine accepted the casualties because the real objective was to clear a path for a strike team of only 7 carefully selected UJ-26 Bobur ERs. At exactly 16:45, the signatures of those 7 appeared simultaneously on Russian radars at the Primorsk port. They flew low, fast, and so close that the air defense system had no time to react. The Pantsir battery at the port panicked and fired 57 E6 missiles, but all were ineffective against the speed and steep approach angles. The 7 Bobur immediately split into 2 groups. The 3 aircraft group dove straight for the port's central pumping station. One was shot down a few hundred meters from the target, but the other 2 completed their mission. The first, carrying a TBG-7V warhead, struck the control building, sucking out the oxygen and producing a pressure wave that blew apart the entire structure. Seconds later, the second slammed into the main pipeline, detonating the entire refueling system. Primorsk shook violently. In another direction, the remaining 4 Bobur attacked the anchorage directly. 2 KZ-6 warheads struck Kabutai Lobov and the main steam turbine, where fuel was stored, producing catastrophic explosions. 2 more struck the flagship Sergei Gorshkov, destroying the engine room and the armored vehicle hold. Fire spread rapidly, engulfing the entire pier area. The situation turned even worse when the flames reached 2 large oil tankers moored there, Kosto of Solstice Corps with a dead weight of 115,000 DWT, and KI-1 of Axionics Limited with a dead weight of 110,000 DWT. Both vessels were close to completing their loading operations. The chain explosions from fuel tanks turned the entire port into a sea of fire. International observers said the scale of the explosions far exceeded a typical military strike. It was strategic, striking directly at the core of Russia's energy and logistics infrastructure in the Baltic region. Within 42 seconds, the KI-1 detonated, and the second Primorsk loading station collapsed. The port's electrical system shorted out. Emergency shutdown protocols activated but could not complete because the power control core had also been destroyed. Fire from Kosto spread across the entire row of storage tanks, black smoke rising for kilometers. Within minutes, Primorsk had become a blazing hell. The Russian Ministry of Defense issued an urgent statement that very night, claiming a total of 221 Ukrainian aircraft had been shot down across the front, and attributing part of the cause to China secretly seizing control of some coastal and oceanic navigation systems. However, international experts viewed the events differently. The sequence showed that Ukraine had carefully calculated timing and methods, exploiting gaps between layered defenses and coastal terrain to deliver a surprise strike. Leaked military documents indicated that Russian radars, including the modern 91N6E Big Bird, are limited by the curvature of the Earth and therefore only detect low-flying targets in the terminal phase. By the time they were detected, the distance was too close, and the reaction time insufficient for effective interception. Reports of destroyed targets accumulated, but they could not stop the 7 Bobur from penetrating the defensive line and striking the system's core. The battle at Primorsk was quickly recorded as a turning point. International film crews happened to capture footage of 2 drones breaching defenses simultaneously, an image released publicly for the first time. Observers concluded the campaign demonstrated one reality: modern war no longer depends solely on expensive weapons, but on tactical creativity and calculated audacity. On the night of 12 December, Ukraine sent a powerful message that a small country can force a superpower to bow to a precise, long-range strike. Analysts say the strategic consequences lie not only in the loss of energy infrastructure, but also in a psychological shift. An elaborate feint campaign caused Russia to misjudge the situation, concentrate forces on decoy targets, and expose a fatal weakness right next to a critical defensive line. This campaign, according to many military experts, marked a defining milestone in how modern warfare is perceived. It demonstrated that superiority no longer lies solely in billion-dollar weapons or massive defense systems, but instead belongs to the skillful combination of tactics, low-cost technology, and human resolve. Independent analysts concluded that it was precisely the medium-range, rapidly produced, low-cost drones such as the AQ-400 or the boldest that reshaped the dynamics of a battlefield once deemed impenetrable. Ukraine proved that with the right timing, clever use of terrain, and exploitation of the physical limits of radar, even the most advanced air defense systems can be breached. Subsequent intelligence reports highlighted a key point. Russian radar, though advanced, still struggled to detect low-flying targets from a distance. When aircraft approached at altitudes of only a few dozen meters, the curvature of the Earth masked them from radar sweeps. This forced systems like the S-400 to rely on late detection, which drastically shortened reaction times. Analysts noted that even when such systems did fire, the probability of intercepting high-speed, close-range targets dropped sharply. This was the very gap Ukraine exploited, combining it with waves of decoy targets that left Russian defenses reactive and constantly dispersed. In the hours that followed, reports from multiple sources described the skies above St. Petersburg, filled with flashes and smoke trails. Dozens of explosions and hundreds of moving signals stretched Russia's domestic defense network to its limits. Some video footage even showed swarms of drones moving in groups from one sector to another, creating chaos on radar screens. This was not just a military strike, but a powerful psychological blow, forcing Russian commanders to confront the reality that their dense defense layers could be pierced from multiple directions simultaneously. The strategic consequences were clear. Militarily, the Primorsk port, one of Russia's critical energy logistics hubs in the Baltic, was completely paralyzed. Large oil tankers were destroyed, the fueling system exploded, and fleet supply lines were severely disrupted. Many energy experts argued the damage went far beyond military impact, directly hitting the international insurance market, as Aframax tankers were sunk during loading. This reverberated across global shipping corporations, raising the risk of instability in the energy supply chain. Tactically, the campaign forced Russia to admit that its A2AD defensive belts were not impenetrable. The fact that hundreds of missiles and thousands of shells were fired yet 7 bombs still reached their targets posed serious questions about the effectiveness of multi-layered air defense systems. Analysts suggested that in the long term, this could compel Russia to restructure its entire defense strategy, especially along coastal areas where the Earth's curvature and complex terrain create fatal weaknesses. Psychologically and politically, Ukraine succeeded in sending the message that it could conduct deep, wide-ranging operations, breaching multiple defensive layers to strike directly at the adversary's strategic infrastructure. While the Russian Ministry of Defense announced more than 200 drones had been shot down to prove its defensive strength, the images of Primorsk engulfed in flames spread across international media, symbolizing the opposite reality. This not only impacted domestic morale in Russia, but also shook the confidence of Moscow's allies and economic partners. Observers emphasized something even more remarkable: the campaign was executed without overly complex technology. The UAVs used were based on modified commercial designs, easy to produce and operate, yet delivering results on par with expensive weapons. This is clear evidence of the transformation of 21st century warfare, from heavy industrial war to smart and agile war. Ukraine leveraged creativity, turning limited resources into unexpected advantages. From a broader perspective, the Primorsk campaign served as a warning to military superpowers. It raised critical questions about the vulnerability of key infrastructure long assumed to be safeguarded by modern defense shields. The event showed that a nation with fewer resources can still deliver a strategic shock simply by choosing the right means, the right timing, and implementing an effective deception strategy. Ultimately, the message to the world was unmistakable. Modern war is not decided solely by enormous defense budgets, but also by intelligence, creativity, and the ability to exploit an adversary's blind spots. On the night of 12 September 2025, Ukraine proved to the world that in this new era, ingenuity and determination can shake even a superpower. From that moment, the global military strategic map gained new evidence that the balance of power is no longer measured by the size of arsenals, but by the ability to wield intellect in the deadly game of the battlefield.